Jimmy Fallon was asking Hannah Berner about her natural comedic talent when something in her expression suddenly crumbled. The comedian and former reality star, who had been making him laugh with her quick wit moments before, went quiet and looked down at her hands. "Jimmy," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I learned to be funny because I had to." The Tonight Show studio, which had been filled with laughter and energy, fell into confused silence. Hannah's comment hung in the air like a riddle that carried unexpected weight. Jimmy's smile faded as he realized this wasn't a setup for another joke. This was something much deeper and more painful. It was October 28th, and Hannah had come on the show to promote her comedy special and podcast tour. The interview had been going brilliantly, full of her signature humor and the quick-fire jokes that had made her a fan favorite. But when Jimmy asked where her comedy instincts came from, something inside her finally broke. "My father has schizophrenia," Hannah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been his entertainer since I was 8 years old." The words came out like secrets that had been locked away for decades. The studio fell into complete shock. Jimmy's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, confusion, and growing empathy. The audience seemed stunned into silence, processing this devastating revelation from someone they knew primarily for making people laugh. "What do you mean, entertainer?" Jimmy asked gently, his voice full of compassion and concern. "Hannah, you were just a child." His tone had shifted completely from comedy host to deeply worried friend. "When Dad would have psychotic episodes, I learned that making him laugh would calm him down." Hannah explained, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "So I became his personal comedian." Her voice carried the weight of a childhood responsibility no child should ever have to bear. "I would dance, tell jokes, do impressions. Anything to bring him back to reality," she continued, her voice breaking. "My comedy wasn't a gift, it was survival." The realization that her greatest talent was born from trauma was devastating to hear. Jimmy leaned forward in his chair, his entire focus on the woman sitting across from him. "How old were you when this started?" he asked carefully, understanding this was incredibly difficult territory. "I was 8 when I first realized I could make the scary man go away," Hannah replied, using the language of a child to describe her father's illness. "He would be ranting, sometimes violent, and then I'd start being silly." The image she painted was both heartbreaking and terrifying. "My mom worked double shifts to pay for his medications," she continued, providing context for why the responsibility fell to her. "So it was just me and Dad during his worst moments." The isolation she described was crushing for anyone, let alone a child. The audience was completely silent now, understanding they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't a comedian sharing material anymore. This was a daughter revealing the traumatic origin of everything she'd built her career on. The cameras captured every emotion crossing her face. "What was it like living with that responsibility?" Jimmy asked softly, his voice full of empathy. Hannah took a shaky breath before answering. "Exhausting," she said simply. "By the time I was 10, I could do 40 different voices and had memorized every comedy routine on TV." Her precocious talent was impressive and tragic in equal measure. "But the worst part," she continued, her voice growing smaller, "was never knowing which dad I'd come home to." The unpredictability of mental illness had shaped every aspect of her childhood. Behind the scenes, producers were grappling with how to handle this unprecedented confession. This wasn't entertainment, this was someone revealing childhood trauma on live television. But they recognized the importance of letting Hannah tell her story. "Did anyone know what you were going through?" Jimmy asked, understanding that childhood trauma often exists in isolation. Hannah shook her head sadly. "I got really good at pretending everything was normal," she admitted. "At school, I was the funny girl." Her ability to compartmentalize was both impressive and heartbreaking. "Teachers loved me because I made everyone laugh. But inside, I was terrified," she continued, her composure beginning to crack. "I thought if I ever stopped being funny, something terrible would happen." The pressure she'd put on herself was suffocating to hear about. Jimmy made a decision that would define this moment. He stood up from behind his desk and walked over to sit in the chair next to Hannah, abandoning the traditional interview setup. "Hannah, that's an incredible burden for a child to carry," he said gently. "The thing about schizophrenia," Hannah explained, looking directly at him, "is that it doesn't just affect the person who has it." Her understanding of the family-wide impact was mature beyond her years. "It consumes everyone around them. Some days Dad was completely lucid, loving, the best father in the world," she continued, painting a complex picture of her relationship with him. "Those were the days I lived for." The intermittent reinforcement of good moments made the bad ones even more devastating. "But other days he thought I was a spy or a demon," she said, her voice breaking. "And on those days, comedy was the only thing that could reach him." Her role as family peacekeeper was both heroic and tragic. The vulnerability in her admission was staggering. Jimmy reached over and gently placed his hand on her arm. "How did this affect your relationship with comedy growing up?" "I became addicted to making people laugh," Hannah admitted without hesitation. "Because laughter meant safety." Her psychological conditioning was clear and heartbreaking. "Even at school, if someone wasn't laughing at my jokes, I'd panic," she continued. "I thought it meant I was failing at the only thing I was good at." Her self-worth had become entirely tied to her ability to entertain others. "Comedy became my currency," she explained, using a metaphor that perfectly captured her relationship with humor. "It's how I bought love, attention, and peace in my house." The transactional nature of her childhood relationships was devastating. The audience was transfixed by Hannah's vulnerability. Many were thinking of their own family struggles, their own ways of coping with household chaos. Her story was creating space for shared understanding about the roles children take on in dysfunctional families. "When did you realize this wasn't normal?" Jimmy asked, understanding that children often don't recognize their situations as unusual. Hannah considered the question carefully. "When I went to my first friend's house, and her dad came home," she said, the memory clearly vivid. "He was just Dad." Her voice carried wonder at the concept of parental normalcy. No performance required. "I remember thinking, why isn't she doing anything? He's just standing there," she continued, describing her confusion at normal family interaction. "That's when I realized other kids didn't have to earn their parents' stability." The realization had been both enlightening and devastating. "How is your father now?" Jimmy asked, his concern extending to her family's current situation. Hannah's expression softened slightly. "He's on medication that works better," she replied, offering some hope. "But the damage to our relationship is complicated." Her honesty about ongoing family struggles was important and realistic. "I love him, but I also resent him," she admitted, her voice carrying years of conflicted emotions. "He took my childhood away without meaning to." Her ability to hold both love and resentment simultaneously was mature and healthy. "And the hardest part," she continued, "is that everyone sees my comedy as this amazing gift." She gestured to the studio around them. "But for me, it's also a reminder of everything I lost." Jimmy was visibly emotional as he listened to her complex relationship with her talent. "Have you been able to separate comedy from survival?" he asked, understanding this was crucial to her healing. "I'm trying," Hannah said honestly. "Therapy has helped me understand that I can choose to be funny now." Her work on herself was evident and inspiring. "I don't have to be funny to survive anymore. But some nights on stage, I still feel like that 8-year-old girl," she admitted, desperately trying to make someone stop being scary. Her vulnerability about ongoing triggers was important for others to hear. "What would you say to other children who might be in similar situations?" Jimmy asked, recognizing that Hannah's words could reach families dealing with mental illness. Hannah looked directly into the camera. "That it's not your job to fix the adults in your life," she said with conviction. "You deserve to be a kid." Her message was both simple and profound. And to parents struggling with mental illness, she continued, "Your children need you to get help." Her directness was compassionate but firm. "They can't be your therapist or your entertainer." But also, she added, her voice growing stronger, having a parent with mental illness doesn't doom you. Her resilience was inspiring. It can make you incredibly empathetic and strong. The studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't typical entertainment applause. This was recognition, support, and love for someone who had shared incredible courage. Many people were openly crying, moved by her honesty and strength. "Do you think you would have become a comedian anyway?" Jimmy asked, exploring the relationship between trauma and talent. Hannah considered this thoughtfully. "I'll never know," she said honestly, "but I like to think I would have found humor in life anyway." Her speculation was both sad and hopeful. Maybe it would have been gentler humor, less desperate. "What I do know," she continued, "is that comedy saved my life in more ways than one." Her gratitude for her coping mechanism was evident. "It protected me as a child and gave me a career as an adult." They talked for a few more minutes about mental health resources, about the importance of family therapy, and about breaking cycles of trauma. Hannah was more genuine and inspiring than she'd ever been in public. When the interview ended, something remarkable happened. Instead of rushing off to her next commitment, Hannah stayed on stage, talking with audience members who approached her with their own stories of family mental illness and childhood trauma. The studio became an impromptu support group. "I never expected this response," Hannah told Jimmy as they watched people sharing their stories around them. "I thought people would see me differently, like damaged goods." Jimmy shook his head. "They see someone who survived and thrived despite impossible circumstances." The episode aired exactly as it happened, with no editing to minimize Hannah's vulnerability. The response was immediate and overwhelming, with mental health organizations praising her courage and comedy clubs beginning conversations about trauma-informed entertainment. Within hours, comedy from trauma began trending on social media. Therapists reported increased calls from adult children of mentally ill parents. Comedy schools started incorporating trauma awareness into their programs. Hannah had accidentally started a movement about the relationship between pain and humor. Other comedians began sharing their own stories of childhood trauma and how it shaped their comedy. Pete Davidson opened up about his father's death. Tig Notaro discussed her cancer journey. The walls of silence around trauma in comedy began crumbling. 3 months later, Hannah returned to The Tonight Show. She looked different, more at peace, carrying herself with new confidence. "How are you doing?" was Jimmy's first question, asked with genuine care. "I'm learning to be funny for me," Hannah replied, her smile radiant and authentic. Not to save anyone or fix anything. Her growth was evident and inspiring. Hannah had used the months since her revelation to become an advocate for families affected by mental illness. Her foundation had funded family therapy programs and respite care for children of mentally ill parents. "Any regrets about sharing your story that night?" Jimmy asked. Hannah shook her head without hesitation. "None," she said firmly. "That scared little girl inside me finally got to tell her truth." The Tonight Show partnered with mental health organizations directly because of Hannah's appearance. They featured regular segments on family mental health, childhood trauma, and healthy coping mechanisms. Jimmy learned something profound that October night that changed how he approached comedy with guests thereafter. "I realized that behind every joke might be a story of survival," he reflected later. "Sometimes the funniest people are carrying the heaviest burdens." Hannah Berner's childhood trauma revelation became more than a viral moment. It became a cultural shift in how society discusses family mental illness and the roles children take on as caretakers. The ripple effects continued for years. Mental health resources for families increased. Schools began training teachers to recognize children who might be serving as family caretakers. Countless individuals found the courage to seek help after hearing Hannah's story. Years later, Hannah would say that revealing her father's illness on live television was the moment she stopped performing survival and started living authentically. "That night, I realized my comedy could come from joy instead of fear," she reflected. The lesson of that extraordinary October night was profound. Sometimes our greatest gifts are born from our deepest wounds. But healing means learning to use those gifts from a place of choice rather than desperation. In a world that often celebrates humor without questioning its origins, Hannah Berner reminded everyone watching that comedy can be both a life-saving coping mechanism and a prison of performance. Her 8-year-old self had done what she needed to survive, and her adult self had the courage to honor that while choosing something different.